Breaking news tonight as a high-profile primetime interview with newly elected President Donald Trump takes an unexpected turn. What was set to be a routine political discussion quickly spirals into one of the most gripping moments in live television history. Millions tuned in, expecting tough questions and strong rebuttals, but what unfolded left even the network's own producers stunned. The exclusive sit-down interview, hosted by veteran journalist Rebecca Lawson, had been heavily promoted in the days leading up to the broadcast. Known for her sharp and often relentless questioning, Lawson had built a reputation for cornering high-profile figures with direct, uncompromising interviews. Her strategy tonight was no different. Sources close to the production team confirmed that her questions were designed to challenge the president, pressure him into a defensive stance, and create a viral moment that would dominate the news cycle. From the moment the cameras went live, the tension was evident. Trump, seated across from Lawson in the brightly lit studio, appeared calm, his body language composed and unshaken. The stage was set, and Lawson wasted no time before launching into her first question. "Mr. President, you've built an empire, returned to the White House, and reshaped the political landscape. But would you say you were just lucky?" The phrasing was deliberate, a calculated attempt to frame his success as a product of circumstance rather than skill or hard work. For a brief moment, Trump didn't respond. A few beats of silence followed, the kind that made for powerful television. In the control room, producers watched closely, knowing that these were the moments that determined the success of an interview. Trump held her gaze, letting the weight of the question settle before leaning forward slightly. "You know, it's interesting that you ask that," he said, his tone steady and composed. "The media loves that word, luck. They use it to explain success they don't understand. But let me ask you something, Rebecca. Do you think luck builds skyscrapers? Do you think luck creates thousands of jobs? Do you think luck wins elections?" There was a slight shift in the atmosphere. The studio, instructed to remain silent, was suddenly filled with an unspoken energy. A murmur from behind the cameras, an exchange of glances among producers. Something had changed. Lawson didn't hesitate. She was experienced. She had handled high-stakes interviews before. She leaned forward slightly, refusing to let the moment slip away. "So, you're saying everything you've achieved is purely through hard work?" "Hard work, risk, sacrifice," Trump replied, without missing a beat. "The kind of things most people don't see. They see the victories. They don't see the nights I barely slept, the deals that almost broke me. But here's the truth. Success isn't given. It's earned." A sharp response, direct, unapologetic. In the control room, the tension was growing. A producer, watching the live feed, muttered, "He's flipping this on us." It wasn't the response they had anticipated. Instead of appearing defensive, Trump was controlling the narrative. Lawson took a breath. If questioning his success wasn't rattling him, there was another angle, one that had been planned in advance. She glanced briefly at her notes before shifting gears. "Let's talk about the people behind Donald Trump," she said, her voice calm but pointed. This was the moment the conversation was about to change. She wasn't going after his career. She was going after his family. And that's when the interview took a turn no one expected. The tension in the studio was rising. As the cameras kept rolling, journalist Rebecca Lawson prepared to shift the conversation in a new direction, one that had been carefully planned to put the president on the defensive. "Let's talk about the people behind Donald Trump," Lawson said, her voice measured but deliberate. The control room went silent. Producers knew exactly what this meant. If Lawson couldn't shake the president with questions about his success, she would take a different approach. She would make it personal. "Your wife, Melania," she continued, her words carefully chosen. "She's been by your side through your business empire, your presidency, and now your second term. But many have noticed something. She's not as vocal, not as visible as other first ladies. Some might even say she prefers to stay in the background. It was subtle, but the intent was clear. frame Melania Trump as passive, insignificant, a woman defined not by her own accomplishments but by her husband's shadow. Trump, however, did not react immediately. He remained still, his expression unreadable. Then, with a slight tilt of his head, he spoke. Quiet? No. Dignified? Yes. There's a big difference. A flicker of reaction swept across the audience. It wasn't loud, but it was there. The producers saw it. The camera operators felt it. Lawson kept her composure. She had seen pushback before, but she wasn't finished. Of course, she said smoothly, adjusting in her chair. But what I mean is, we rarely hear from her. Unlike other political wives who are very visible, don't you think the public deserves to know more about the woman behind Donald Trump? Trump exhaled through his nose, shaking his head slightly. The public, he said, his voice carrying a mix of pride and control, knows exactly what they need to know about Melania. She's brilliant, she's accomplished, and she chooses her moments carefully. Unlike some people who feel the need to fill every silence with noise. A murmur rippled through the room. The jab was subtle, but it landed. Lawson shifted slightly in her chair. She could feel the conversation slipping, the tone of the interview shifting out of her control. She needed to regain momentum. She adjusted her approach, moving from framing Melania as silent to questioning her achievements. Let's talk about those accomplishments, she said, her tone sharpening. Because some critics say, well, they wonder if her main achievement isn't simply being Mrs. Donald Trump. The tension in the studio tightened instantly. A pause. A noticeable pause. Even the camera operators, seasoned professionals used to live broadcast tension, felt the shift in the air. Trump's expression hardened. His jaw set, his body language shifting slightly, signaling that this was no longer just an interview, it was personal. Let me be very clear about something, he said, his voice carrying an edge. Since you want to talk about accomplishments, let's talk facts. Lawson blinked but didn't look away. Melania speaks 5 languages fluently. A soft murmur in the audience. She built her own successful career long before she ever met me. The murmur grew. She has represented this country with more grace and dignity than any first lady in recent memory. A brief ripple of applause. It wasn't overwhelming, but it was noticeable, and it wasn't what the producers wanted. But you wouldn't know about that, would you? Trump continued, his voice steady. Because the mainstream media is too busy pushing their own narrative. The control room wasn't prepared for this. This was supposed to be a difficult interview for Trump. Instead, he was turning it into a statement against the media itself. Lawson knew she had to pivot, and fast. Of course, Mr. President, she said, recovering quickly. But don't you think that being married to you has opened certain doors for her? A question designed to make Melania's success seem dependent on Trump. Trump let out a quiet chuckle, but there was no humor in it. You know what's interesting about that question, he said, tilting his head slightly. It tells me exactly how you see the world. Lawson's eyebrow lifted slightly. How so? She asked. Because people like you think success is about doors being opened, Trump said, his tone controlled but sharp. The studio fell completely silent. But real success? He leaned forward slightly. Real success is about what you do once you're in the room. And then the audience reacted. A break in protocol, scattered applause. Some nodded, a few whispered among themselves. Lawson remained expressionless, but inside she felt the shift. The narrative was slipping further away. Still, she wasn't finished. She had one final move. Surely, she said, her voice taking on an edge of desperation, you must admit that your position, your wealth, your influence, it all affects how people see her. Trump's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. And then his response would become one of the most talked-about moments in television history. You mean how people like you see her? Lawson stiffened. Trump's voice was steady, his words sharp. Because let me tell you something about influence and wealth. They don't create character. They reveal it. The room was so silent you could hear the hum of the studio lights. Lawson opened her mouth to speak, but Trump wasn't finished. And what Melania has revealed, he shook his head slightly, is exactly why I'm proud to have her by my side. Another burst of applause. Lawson tried to regain control. This interview was not going the way it had been planned. She glanced briefly at her notes, searching for an opening. She had one last question. One final attempt to take back control of the conversation. She took a deep breath and went for it. "Mr. President," she said, leaning in slightly, "don't you ever think about trading up?" The studio erupted. Gasps, audible shock, even the camera crew reacted. In the control room, the silence was instant. A producer muttered under his breath, "She just lost the room." The energy in the studio had completely changed. Trump didn't move. He didn't blink. Trading up. The words hung in the air. And then he spoke. Trading up? His voice was quiet but deadly serious. A long pause. An intentionally long pause. Then, his tone dropped lower. "Let me tell you something about value," he said, his words slow, deliberate, since that seems to be all you understand. And what happened next would make television history. The studio was frozen in silence. The air, thick with tension, crackled with the weight of the moment. Every camera was locked in place. Every microphone caught the sharp intake of breath from those in the audience. Rebecca Lawson had just asked the question that no one had expected. "Mr. President, don't you ever think about trading up?" The words had barely left her lips when a ripple of shock spread through the room. Gasps were audible. Even the most seasoned studio crew members, professionals who had seen it all, felt a shift in the energy of the broadcast. The control room was in chaos. Producers scrambled, some frantically whispering into earpieces, others frozen in disbelief. One muttered under his breath, "She just made the biggest mistake of her career." At the center of it all, Donald Trump didn't move. For the first time that night, his expression hardened into something unreadable. He sat still, his posture unchanged, his fingers lightly tapping against the armrest of his chair. Then he leaned forward, just slightly. "Trading up?" he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. His tone wasn't angry, it wasn't loud, but it was deadly serious. Rebecca Lawson shifted in her seat. The confidence she had carried throughout the interview suddenly seemed fragile. Trump didn't blink. "Let me tell you something about value," he continued, his voice low and deliberate, every word landing with precision. "Since that seems to be all you understand." Another silence. Not the awkward kind. The kind that holds weight. The kind that signals something unforgettable is about to happen. "Some people," Trump continued, "see relationships the way they see real estate. You find a newer model, a shinier option, something with fewer flaws, and you trade up." His voice remained steady, but there was an unmistakable steel beneath it. "But that's not how real value works." Lawson inhaled, but she didn't speak. She couldn't. "Real value," Trump said, his eyes locked onto hers, "isn't something you upgrade. It's something you recognize, something you protect, something you fight for." The silence in the studio was absolute. Even those who had entered the room with their own opinions, their own biases, sat completely still. The tension was palpable, not manufactured, real. "And let me tell you something about my wife," Trump continued, now speaking not just to Lawson, but to every person watching at home. "Melania isn't valuable because of how she looks. She isn't valuable because of who she married. She's valuable because of who she is." Another murmur spread through the audience. The words landed, not just as a response, but as a statement. "She is loyal, she is intelligent, she is strong. And you think I'd trade that for something newer?" Trump shook his head. You don't know anything about real relationships, Rebecca, and that's why this conversation, it was over the moment you asked that question. Lawson opened her mouth, but no words came out. She glanced at her notes, but they were suddenly useless. The power dynamic had shifted so dramatically that there was no recovering. In the control room, the producers had seen enough. A frantic voice crackled through the earpiece of the studio director. Cut to commercial, now. The signal was given. The show's familiar transition music began playing. The screen faded, and, just like that, the most explosive moment in live television was over. But in the world beyond the studio, it had just begun. Within minutes, clips of the exchange flooded social media. Hashtags exploded, news analysts scrambled to interpret what had just happened. And as for Rebecca Lawson, the moment she had hoped would define her career had done exactly that, just not in the way she had planned. Did this moment expose media bias, or was it simply a masterclass in handling tough questions? Let your voice be heard. Drop a comment below and tell us your thoughts. If you believe in strong values, in standing by those who stand by you, in the importance of loyalty over fleeting trends, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more reports like this. Because in an era where words can shape narratives, the truth deserves to be heard. This is Alex, signing off.